So Nader Rad started working in construction project management around 20 years ago, and he's also been a project planner for large process plant-based projects as well, and got involved in entrepreneurial and IT projects, moving into the role of project manager and then into an advisory role, helping organizations to improve their project management. But now he spends most of his time either developing learning materials, which he distributes with his business partner, Frank Turley, who we had on the show not very long ago, under the brand of Management Plaza, and also contributing to a number of standards and methodologies, including PRINCE2 and PRINCE2 Agile, and the PMBOK guide, and also to P3 Express, which he and Frank created. And we've heard from Frank about that in a recent episode. But among the standards that Nader contributes to is the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide. And he was drawn into the core team, I think of 12 people, developing the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide, which is now, we believe, due out in August 2021. That's the latest news from the PMI. They are entitled to change their minds should they need to, but they're project managers, so let's hope we can hold them to that date. And it promises to be a radical departure from any of its 6 ancestors. And I've actually raided the bookshelf. This is its father. This is the 6th edition, which it may or may not replace. I'll be asking Nader about that and its relationship, the 7th edition's relationship to the 6th edition. This is its great-great-great-great-grandfather, the 1st edition. This is where I learned my PMI, PMP syllabus from, before actually not taking the exam. So, but this was easy. This is 176 pages. So all of that is to say, I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak to Nader as someone who is really knowledgeable about the PMBOK 7th edition. But he has asked me to remind you that he is speaking in a personal capacity. The opinions he gives are going to be his and his alone. And you mustn't take them to represent the opinions of either the PMI nor indeed the core PMBOK 7 team. But with that warning out of the way, welcome to the show, Nader.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. And I really envy you that you have the 1st edition. I have the PDF version, but not the real paper one.
We'll talk about the new PMBOK guide in a moment, and the fact that it's based on principles rather than processes and knowledge areas, which I think is really exciting. And I think when I first came across you and your writing and your thinking, I was very taken with your nearly universal principles of project management, 6 principles, which I found very compelling. And the PMBOK, the new PMBOK guide, as far as we know, is going to be principles based. So I'm interested in the relationship between those 2 facts and how you came to be part of that core team. So can you give us a bit of background to the story?
Okay, sure. So we had this e-learning course for the PMP exam when it was the 5th edition of the PMBOK guide. And later on, when the 6th edition came out, I started updating the course. And when I was going through the new version, I saw some things that were really unexpected for me. I had some consideration. So I started talking to people that I knew are familiar with the PMBOK guide, and I didn't get the answer that I wanted to. So then I remembered that there's this one of the people that I know from one of the conferences, PMI conferences, that was part of the team for the development of the 6th edition. Mm-hmm. I got in touch with him. We had a lot of conversation about that topic. We couldn't really agree on that. But at the end, he told me, why don't you join the team for the 7th edition now that you're so concerned about these things in the PMBOK guide? So I would love to. So he introduced me to the people for the leadership team. They added me to a list. And after a year or so, there was some evaluations and interviews and so on. And at the end, they decided to pick me as one of those 12 people for the seventh edition. Yeah, and I guess the fact that I had worked on NUPP, the nearly universal principles of projects, and other things like P3 Express and being a reviewer for PRINCE2 and PRINCE2 Agile probably helps.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the things that struck me when the core team was announced and the leadership was announced was it started to look like it was going to be a proper integration of agile approaches and predictive approaches and anything in between, rather than what the sixth edition feels like, which is taking two things and bolting them together with some rusty bolts.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I put it for the sixth edition. Yeah, there was a lot of content about Agile, but it was really bolted into.
Yeah, and in fact, literally, the Agile bit is another book. It's a separate document, really. If you read the sixth edition on its own, you get a sense that it was paying lip service no more. So we kind of know the history, or at least I think we can assume that the history is of academic interest only, really. But to me, the evolution from the first to the sixth edition is almost evolution. It is evolutionary. Each change is small. It adds something. It gets a bit bigger, gets fatter. But there's nothing revolutionary. But it seems to me that the seventh edition is going to be a revolutionary change. So how will this new PMBOK guide differ from its predecessors? What are the important changes from your point of view?
Well, as you said, the previous versions were always trying to build on top of the previous one, improving the previous version. But it had a process-based approach, and there's only so much you can do with such an approach because inherently it's detailed. It's about the details of work. It's about the things you do. We changed the perspective. So instead of having a process-based approach, meaning that is starting with processes, we start with principles now in the seventh edition. And from there, we go on. And the reason is that we believe that it makes it easier for practitioners. It makes it more realistic, more practical, more useful. And also, it gives more room for improvements in the future. We can go on like this for a really long time and keep improving it without reaching a dead end.
Yeah,
there's a lot of room here.
Yeah,
and well, when you said changes, we really wrote everything from scratch. We only copied and pasted a few things like the definition of project and definition of project management. For the rest, we didn't copy paste. We just wrote everything.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of work, but then I'm guessing we've reached the end of, for now, of the expansion in the spine. I'm thinking this will be a significantly smaller document than the 6th edition.
Yeah, maybe even smaller than the 1st edition. That really depends on how they do the layout and everything else, and how much of an index they're going to add, and for the introduction and so on. I really don't know. But the main part that we prepared, that's really tiny when you compare it to the previous versions. It's really, really tiny. And that's also the other thing, because when people see such a huge thing, it's a little bit frightening, you know?
Yeah.
Project managers have a lot of things to worry about. They need something practical that can make it easier for them as soon as possible.
Yeah.
There is a long-term continuous improvements, but that's a different matter. We need to have the skeleton for the project, the fundamentals. We were not focused on those fundamentals, on those most important things that you need as a project manager. But now it's a little bit toward that part.
Yeah. And as a core team, were you briefed to be revolutionary, or did you take it upon yourselves as a team to be revolutionary?
Well, there are parts of the process of working in the team that that is not supposed to be discussed outside the team. I'm afraid. I don't know if this is one of those or not, but we have this NDA, and just to be safe, let's
Okay.
Leave it outside for now.
But clearly PMI is pleased with the result. It's publishing it. And in terms of profitability, you say it's going to be a lot smaller, but the price hasn't actually reduced. So we'll be paying an awful lot more per word when we get our copies. How do you anticipate that the project management community will respond to the different approach you've taken and the content that's in there?
I really expect mixed reactions
Mm.
from different people because they have different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who are thinking about the way they can use the PMBOK guide in their projects, I think they will be happier. But a lot of people who know the PMBOK guide are mostly interested in passing the PMP exam or things like that, and some of them may not like it. I don't know. I don't want to anchor anyone. But I've heard things. For example, there was this webinar that I had somewhere, and someone said that, but the sixth edition is more exam friendly. And I said, okay, is that a good thing that we are less exam friendly or a bad thing? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't know, because that was never our concern when we were working on the PMBOK guide. We were never concerned about exams or things like that. We were concerned about creating something that people can use, something that can help people. The projects, we are concerned about projects. That's all.
Yeah, I like what I know of it, and I'm looking forward to reading it because, like, I think I can infer is your opinion. I think it's more important that we are able to practice project management than we're able to pass exams. Exams to me are a necessary evil if you want employment in certain places and for certain organizations. But actually what matters is our ability to deliver projects. And I think a document that makes us think and gives us ideas and helps us do our job is of more value to me than a document, because anyone can write an exam prep book and there are already dozens of them for PMP. So why do we need PMI to provide a giant prep book? So I like that idea. Yeah. And I compare the PMBOK to the Association for Project Management, their body of knowledge, and that is very different in style, I think, probably to what you're creating and and as well as to the sixth edition. And I think it's a better book because it's a resource guide rather than a thousand processes. So that's nice. But I think we do need to acknowledge that question about the exams, because PMBOK 7, as far as I understand it, won't include the 10 knowledge areas and the detailed description of all the processes that sit, the sub-processes that sit within them, and the 5 big processes. And, so what would be the impact? And there's possibly two answers here. Firstly, on the CAPM, and secondly, on the PMP exam, because at the moment, PMBOK 6 is the CAPM syllabus. PMBOK 6 is an important component of the PMP exam. What can you tell us about how that's going to play out?
Well, the processes and the knowledge areas and the process groups won't be there in the 7th edition. It's not part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not gone forever. There's this new platform called the Standards Plus,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where they continue their lives. And hopefully they will grow and become better. But the whole point is that they won't be considered the core of the PMBOK guide anymore. There are one way of expanding what we have in the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide, and not the only way, because that's absolutely 100% my opinion, and I'm sure that many people won't agree with me, but I see those processes to be a lot closer to the predictive approaches. That's what people had in mind when they designed those. And it doesn't matter how much you add extra words in there, they won't become adaptive. And the PMBOK guide is supposed to support every type of project.
Yes.
That's one problem. The other problem is that when you have a big process plan project or a big construction project, the way you do, especially in the time and scope areas, is not so much different from what we have in those processes.
Mm.
But there are a lot of smaller projects, and tailoring those processes to those small projects is not that easy.
Mm.
So hopefully what will happen in the Standards Plus is that we will have different domains. We will have content for example, construction projects, for process plan projects, for research projects, for IT projects, and so on. And in each of those, we will have the proper expansion of what we have in the PMBOK 7.
Yeah.
Some of them will use a lot from the processes that we had before. Some of them will be only inspired by those processes, but give people something that really matches what they need in those types of projects, and so on. That's what will happen to the processes. And for the exams, I'm not so close to what happens in that there's a different group and they do their own things. They were not, we are not part of that group. But as much as I know, at the beginning of 2021, we had this new version of the PMP exam, for example. And when it was created, we still did not have the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide. We don't have it right now that we are speaking. It will be published later. So the parts of the PMBOK guide that is used in the current exam is from the 6th edition.
Yeah.
When the 7th edition comes, we won't have a major change in the PMP exam. It will be still the current version. But gradually, they will add new questions based on the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide. But they will probably also keep a lot of questions from the 6th edition.
Yeah.
So it will be a really gradual change. And that's what I know about the exams. I don't know a lot of details.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Eventually, I suppose those questions that you've referred to as drawing from the 6th edition will be badged as drawing from that Standards Plus database. And I like the idea of growing that Standards Plus resource in the direction of other methodologies, because that will truly then build on a set of core principles, and it will properly link together the exams and the PMBOK guide, but in a way that is respectful of the different traditions of project management that we come from. So I think that if your projection, which makes sense to me, it turns out to be right, I think that could be very good for PMI and good for the community. So that's great. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is, you've worked on this huge piece of work. Firstly, is there any aspect that you're able to talk about of the new PMBOK guide that you're particularly proud of? Maybe because you made a big contribution to it, maybe because it chimes very well with your way of thinking. What would be the highlights for you as a project manager?
Well, there's this one thing that I'm really happy about. Besides the fact that it's principle-based, because, I really love that approach, and it was something that I worked on before the PMBOK guide. I really, really do believe that it's important for project managers to start with principles, because at the end of the day, you see that there are many different approaches to project management, and they may seem to be really different from each other, but what they want to help you achieve is not that different.
Yeah.
And those things that are in common in most projects, those are the principles. So it makes a lot of sense to have them in mind, especially based on the fact that sometimes people forget why they are doing things that they do.
Yeah.
And when it happens, they do spend the effort, but they don't get the results that they deserve because they forgot the purpose. It helps prevent those things. That's the cargo cult effect. What was your question? I remember. So that's the fundamental thing that I'm very happy about, having a principle-based approach. Something a little bit smaller that I really like is that one of the principles is about systems thinking. And one
Ah,
part of that is critical thinking, which I always keep saying that it's very important for project managers to be critical thinkers. There are lots of resources about critical thinking. There are amazing, and it's unbelievable how much they can help people.
mm,
Hopefully, it will encourage more people to learn about it. There are general books for those of your audience who are interested. There are general books about critical thinking. They can start reading them. And then there are at least two good books that I know of about critical thinking for project managers.
okay.
Both of them are really good.
Do you want to
It's a
tell our
great
audience what
investment.
they are? Because if they want to pick up the books, I'll put the links below. What books would you be recommending to project managers on critical thinking?
Okay, what I usually recommend is to start with this book called The Art of Clear Thinking, the Art of Thinking Clearly, something like that.
Okay, is that Dobelli? Is that Ralph Dobelli?
I'm not good with names. Don't
Okay,
ask me
I'll
that.
check it up.
It,
The Art of Thinking
yeah,
Clearly.
yeah, I think that was the name. It's a really good book, and the whole book is based on examples. It goes one bias at a time.
Yeah,
Uh, that makes it easy for everyone to read. There's
yeah,
also the audio version in case Corona is over and people go back to work. They can
yeah.
listen to it when they are going to work or back home. So that's a good one to start. And after that, there's Thinking Fast and Slow. That's a good
Okay,
book.
yeah,
It mainly helps people understand the dynamics behind the biases.
yeah.
And after that, the two books that are about critical thinking for project managers, one of them is, I think, Thinking on Purpose. That's the name.
Okay, not come across that one.
Yeah. And the other one is Project Decisions, the Art
Okay,
and Science. So
brilliant.
these four books are my recommendations.
Well, interestingly, Thinking Fast and Slow is one that I nearly always recommend in courses and things. It's on my list of 12 management books that everyone should read. And you talk about the importance of critical thinking to project managers. I'm increasingly telling every project manager that the thing you need to understand is human psychology. And of course, the the subject of biases, which is fundamentally what Thinking Fast and Slow is about, is where the kind of methods of critical thinking overlap with an understanding of psychology, because critical thinking is about overcoming our biases. And so I think you're absolutely spot on. Great to hear that's going to be part of the PMBOK guide. And I hope that PMI will be finding and pointing people to good quality resources like those. I'll put the links in the description below so people can find them easily. What are your overall feelings about the piece of work you've done? How's it left you feeling about project management and about PMI and about the work you put in? Has it been good experience, bad experience?
Oh, it was very interesting and intense. It was a lot of work.
Yeah,
When we started, it was as I think we had 1 year or 2 years to do it, and so that's a lot of time. But
yeah,
then when we started, oh no, we don't have enough time. We
yeah,
have to push. We have to push. And for example, when we published the public exposure draft, we
yeah,
received thousands of comments, and it's not something you can finish going through in 1 hour or so. You have
yeah.
to
It's
go
it's
through
it's
every comment.
yeah,
It's unbelievable. There were a lot of them, and some of them very interesting. Sometimes I was reading the comments and I was going, "Oh, why didn't I think of that? I
yeah,
wanted to be the person who thinks like that." But
yeah,
it's too late. But anyway, thanks.
yeah. So I'm
And
guessing that process led to some changes of substance.
we did have a lot of changes. We did have a lot of interesting changes because of that. For some of them, it was, you know, in the previous versions, we had this knowledge area about integration.
Yeah.
That's still an important concept for us. Some of the changes are not about one part of the book. That's
Yeah.
what we get when we ask for comments. Someone says something about one small sentence, but then you keep thinking about it and you see that in order to change it properly and keep the whole thing consistent, I have to go through everything and make a lot of changes. And
Mm.
those changes impact a lot of other things. So that's one of the things that makes it complicated. We spend many, many hours going through the comments. And at certain points in time, I thought I can never finish the comments, but we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Wow.
And then there was also the issue with Corona and
Yeah.
all of that, because it started when we started the main parts of the board. So we had to change the way we wanted to work.
Yeah. So that pretty much the whole of that, the work was done remotely using Zoom style calls.
Except for one meeting. Only the first meeting was in person, and then the world changed. Everything collapsed.
So all that free travel that you thought you'd get went out the window. So, you mentioned that you see this as the start of a new series of evolutions and developments. Are you far enough away from it yet? Do you have any thoughts about what you might like to see for the future of the standard as it goes forward?
I do see it as the first step, really. The first step in this, with this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up a lot of room, and I really like to see a lot of people engaging with it, criticizing it, providing more comments as the actual publication comes out, uh, and even more changes in the next versions. That's what I really like to see. Fortunately, PMI is open to all of these.
Yeah.
That's something that many people don't expect from PMI, but really, it's been very open to changes.
There have been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. It's been a busy
Yeah.
time for the PMI, and I think people were rocked by the extent of the changes to the syllabus of the PMP. People were very split by something as simple as the new logo. It kind of tore the community apart. I think, and yet actually change is our business. We're project managers. We should expect change. We should
Yeah.
embrace change. We should see the value of it. And of course, half of us would describe ourselves as iterative, incremental project managers who don't expect to get it right first time. And so I think the process of changing PMBOK guide needs to be, part of the way we do projects. So I like that. So is there anything I haven't asked you? Are there any thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners, or any kind of summing up you'd like to make before I ask you how we can get in touch with you?
Usually at the end of the webinar, this is not a webinar, but at the end, when there's a question like that, I have two suggestions. One of them is for project managers and everyone involved in projects to learn about critical thinking, which we already talked about.
Yeah.
The other thing that I believe is very important is for all of us, to be open-minded in our community, which sounds like a very simple thing, but it's not always the case. There is no reason for someone to say that, for example, I'm a PMBOK guide type of person and I don't care about PRINCE2, or I'm a PRINCE2 type of project manager, don't care about the PMBOK guide, or I use Agile, I don't need the PMBOK guide. These things don't really make sense, if you ask me. Each of these things is one way of solving certain problems, and we all have those problems. These are different solutions for those problems, and for any of us who really wants to be a professional, we need to know all of these things. These are all great resources, and it's not a cult, it's not a religion to stick to just one of those.
Yeah.
You have to use all of them. learn all of them, and never consider any of those things as the absolute truth. They are not. They are all works in progress.
Yeah,
That
I think
that's my suggestion to everyone.
I completely agree. I think, you know, as soon as someone takes a position at one extreme and then sets themselves against the other extreme, they've missed the point. The the world doesn't work in extremes. It's all about balance, and there will be situations where moving towards what in one direction is going to be right for the situation, and other situations where you want to move in the opposite direction. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think the working from principles gets us to the right place on that. It recognizes that that whole spectrum has value, but there are some things that control where the spectrum sits. I like the idea that you can find some things that, for the moment, we believe to be true and we hold to be valuable guides, and then develop all our practical processes from those in the directions we need to. So I think that's fantastic guidance. Before I thank you, if people are interested in what you do, how you think, and want to see some of your recorded training courses, of course, they can all get to those from Online PM Courses website, where we resell all of those. But how can people get in touch with you, engage with you? What do you do when you're not working with the PMI and your colleagues there?
I don't spend so much time on social media. I'm not a
Good for
Twitter
you.
type of person like that. I used to be in LinkedIn a lot, but not anymore, because it seems to be different a little bit. You can't find a lot of real content anymore. So, but anyway, for people to get in touch with me, well, there's my website, nader.pm.
Okay, we'll put that down
PM
there.
for project management.
Yep.
It's down there probably. It's not down there right now, but
It's
I
down
can see
there.
the future. I can see the future. Yeah, so that's one thing. But still, if anyone wants, they can find me on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation if they want. I would be happy to.
Excellent. That's great. And what I would say about Nader's website is like him, it is elegant and concise. But there is a link there to another website with the nearly universal project principles, so you can see the 6 principles that Nader put forward. How many years ago? It's a fair while back, isn't it?
Yeah, it was published before I became a part of the team.
Yeah.
There's also P3 Express if you want to introduce the people.
Absolutely. Yeah. and the interview I did with Frank was great, and it's turning out to be very popular. So if you'd be game for it, I'd be game to pick up on other aspects of P3 Express with you in a future interview, and get that
Absolutely.
out. Well, we'll talk more about that again in the future. But for the time being, I think we've learned so much from you about PMBOK 7, which I think will be just as interesting after it's published for people to understand a little bit about the context and about one of the core team and how you think. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Nader, for
my pleasure,
giving us a really great insight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here, and thanks for everyone who's watching. Have a good day.
Thank you. One thing I didn't ask you in the interview, because most people wouldn't know what it means and wouldn't care even if they did, but will it contain the ANSI standard? Because the PMBOK guide contains the standard. It always was at the back, wasn't it? So will the standard be
the same as
changing?
before? Yeah, there will be 2 sections to the book: the standard and the guide. Well, the exact format can change, but still there are 2 parts. The difference is that in the previous versions, it was all about processes, and the standard was where it presented the processes based on process groups. Mm-hmm. And then the guide was the part that it was presenting the same processes, but from the knowledge areas perspective and with more detail. But this time, the content is completely different. The standard contains the principles, and one section about tailoring that is a lot longer than what we had before. It actually gives people some opinion about the way they can tailor their projects. And well, yeah, it's a two-step process. First, you tailor everything for your organization because you probably have similar projects or for different portfolios in your organization. Yeah. And then you do the rest for your project. It's not like reinventing the wheel all the time. So these are the standard, and then there's the guide, and the guide is about the domains, the performance domains, about techniques and models. What was the name? Practices, models, and techniques, something like that. So this is the structure, and the first part is the standard, and it has to go through all the special steps of a standard, and that's the part that was in the exposure draft, because only the standard is required to have public comments. The other part, we didn't go through that because we thought that there won't be enough time for it.
Yeah, but also the standard has the timing on the standard is outside to a degree PMI's control, because ANSI presumably has to approve it before it can be published. Is that right?
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.